The pen trembled in my hand as I stared down at the legal documents spread across our family's mahogany Christmas dinner table. The room had fallen into a suffocating silence, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace and the distant sound of carolers outside. My brother sat across from me, arms folded, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth like he'd already won. My father stood at the head of the table, his shadow stretching long across the white tablecloth, his voice low and commanding when he spoke. "Sign it," he said, not as a suggestion but as an order, the way he'd spoken to me my entire life. "This inheritance belongs to the men in this family. It's tradition. It's what your grandfather would have wanted." My mother sat to my right, her eyes fixed on her plate, saying nothing, her silence as damning as any words could have been. Extended family members lined the walls like a jury, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement with my father. My hand hovered over the signature line, and for a moment I almost did it. I almost gave in a way I always had, the way I'd been conditioned to since childhood. And then the dining room door opened. A figure stepped into the doorway, tall and composed, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Every head turned. My father's expression changed from confidence to confusion. My brother's smirk vanished. And that's when my boss walked in, and everything changed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how we arrived at this moment, how a family Christmas dinner became a battleground over millions of dollars, and why my boss of all people would appear at such a pivotal moment, we need to go back to the beginning. This isn't just a story about money or inheritance. It's about power, control, gender, tradition, and the invisible chains that families wrap around their children, sometimes with love, sometimes with manipulation, and often with both. The question that haunted me for years was simple but devastating. Was this really about tradition, or was I being used? How far will a family go to maintain power and preserve an image they've built over generations? And more importantly, when do you finally say enough? I grew up in what most people would call a successful family. My father ran a medium-sized manufacturing business that his father had started in the 1960s. We weren't billionaires, but we were comfortable, the kind of comfortable where money was discussed in hushed tones and appearances mattered more than happiness. From as early as I can remember, there were rules in our house, unspoken but absolute. My brother, 3 years older than me, was the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who would carry on the family name and legacy. I was expected to be supportive, helpful, pleasant, and ultimately invisible when it came to matters of real importance. At family dinners, my brother's mediocre grades were celebrated as evidence of his creative mind, while my straight A's were met with a nod and a reminder not to be arrogant. When he wrecked his first car at 17, my father bought him another one and laughed about boys being boys. When I asked to borrow the family car for a college interview, I was told to take the bus because it would build character. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the pattern of my entire childhood, a constant reinforcement of who mattered and who didn't. My brother played sports, so the whole family attended his games. I played violin in the school orchestra, and my parents came to one concert in 4 years. He was loud, confident, demanding, and he got what he wanted. I was quiet, hardworking, hopeful that if I just proved myself enough, things would change. They never did. The family business was always discussed as my brother's future. He would take over when my father retired, carry on the legacy, make the family proud. Never mind that he showed no interest in manufacturing, no aptitude for business, and no desire to actually work for anything. It was simply understood the way some families pass down china patterns or recipes. I, on the other hand, was encouraged to find a nice, stable job, maybe marry well, and remember where I came from. The message was clear without ever being explicitly stated. I was not part of the plan. I was an accessory to it. By the time I graduated college, I'd learned to keep my accomplishments quiet. I'd learned to smile and nod when my brother took credit for ideas I'd suggested. I'd learned that love in my family was conditional, rationed, and always weighted toward one side of the scale. But there was something my family never knew, something I'd kept private not out of shame, but out of self-preservation. I was good at what I did. Very good. And I was about to become someone they never expected. After college, I moved 3 hours away and took an entry-level position at a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. It wasn't glamorous, but I was hungry to prove myself, not to my family anymore, but to myself. I worked 80-hour weeks, learned everything I could, made connections, and slowly built a reputation for being reliable, strategic, and discreet. My family barely asked about my work. When they did, I kept my answers vague. I was busy. It was fine. Nothing special. They seemed relieved that I wasn't trying to compete with my brother's supposed destiny. What they didn't know was that within 3 years, I'd been promoted twice. Within 5 years, I was managing major accounts. And by year 7, I was working directly under one of the most respected figures in corporate consulting on the East Coast, a man known for his brilliance, his discretion, and his ability to save or dismantle companies with equal skill. His name was Vincent Carrington, and he didn't suffer fools. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and possessed a quiet authority that made CEOs nervous and boards of directors listen. He saw something in me that my family never had, potential. Not potential to be useful to someone else, but potential to lead, to strategize, to command a room. Under his mentorship, I flourished. I learned to negotiate, to read people, to see the structures of power that held organizations together or tore them apart. I learned that the skills I developed surviving my family, reading subtext, navigating unspoken hierarchies, managing egos, were exactly what made me good at my job. By the time I turned 32, I was one of Vincent's senior advisors, managing multi-million-dollar restructures and earning a salary that would have shocked my family had they known. But I didn't tell them. I let them think I was still that quiet, unimportant child who'd learned her place. Meanwhile, my brother's life was unfolding exactly as predicted, which is to say, disastrously. He'd been given a position at the family business immediately after a lackluster college career. No interview, no proving himself, just handed a title and an office. My father praised him constantly, told everyone his son was learning the ropes, destined for greatness. The reality was different. My brother had no discipline, no interest in the actual work, and a growing taste for the lifestyle that a business could fund. Without understanding the effort required to sustain it, he made impulsive decisions, alienated key clients, spent company money on personal luxuries, and when things went wrong, my father covered for him. Every mistake was explained away, every failure reframed as a learning experience. By the time my brother was 35, the company was struggling. Orders were down, clients were leaving, and there were whispers in the industry about mismanagement. My father, now in his late 60s, was trying to hold everything together, but the cracks were showing. And still, the family narrative held firm. My brother was the future, I was just the daughter who'd moved away and worked some office job nobody really understood. Then my grandfather died. He was 91, sharp until the end, a man who'd built something from nothing and who'd always looked at me with a kind of knowing sadness, as if he saw what the rest of the family refused to acknowledge. At his funeral, I stood at the back while my brother gave a eulogy he hadn't written, and my father accepted condolences like a king receiving his subjects. I thought that would be the end of it, a sad closing of a chapter. Then the will was read. My grandfather had been more strategic than anyone realized. He'd set up a trust, carefully structured, legally airtight, and he divided his estate in a way that no one expected. The family business, the property, the investments, it all went into a trust with specific instructions. My father would maintain control during his lifetime, but upon his death or retirement, the assets would be distributed according to a formula that assessed contribution, capability, and character. It was my grandfather's way of trying to force accountability, to ensure that what he'd built wouldn't be squandered by entitlement. And then there was a separate bequest, a personal inheritance of $3.9 million set aside in a restricted account, designated specifically for me. Not my brother. Not split between us.
Just me.
The reading of the will was the first time I'd seen my family truly speechless. My father's face went red, then white. My brother looked like he'd been slapped. My mother reached for her pearls, a nervous habit she'd had for decades. And me? I sat there, numb, trying to process what this meant. My grandfather had seen me. He'd known. He'd tried, in the only way he could from beyond death, to balance the scales. For about 48 hours, the family pretended to be happy for me. Congratulations were offered, stiff and hollow. Then the real conversation began. It started subtly, as these things always do. My father called, voice warm and fatherly in a way it hadn't been in years. He wanted to talk about family, about legacy, about what my grandfather would have really wanted. He suggested that perhaps the money should go toward the family business, that it was in trouble and needed capital, that this was an opportunity to invest in our shared future. I listened, said I'd think about it, and ended the call feeling uneasy. My brother reached out next, his tone different, almost desperate. He talked about how unfair the will was, how grandfather must have been confused at the end, how the money should be split properly. He mentioned his debts, casually at first, then more insistently. He needed this. The family needed this. Didn't I understand? My mother called and cried. She talked about family unity, about how divisive money could be, about how she'd raised me to be generous and kind. She never directly asked me to give up the inheritance, but the implication was clear. A good daughter would share. The pressure built slowly over months. Family gatherings became tense negotiations. Extended relatives weighed in, most of them siding with my father and brother, some because they genuinely believed in traditional inheritance customs, others because they didn't want to cross the family patriarch. I was painted as selfish, ungrateful, difficult. The narrative became, the money was causing problems, therefore I was causing problems by accepting it. Never mind that I'd done nothing except exist and be named in a will. Never mind that my brother had made his own financial choices. Never mind that my grandfather had the right to distribute his assets however he chose. The logic didn't matter. The family had decided how this should go, and I was expected to comply. By the time a year had passed, the family business was in worse shape. My brother had made more bad decisions, spent more money they didn't have, and alienated more clients. My father was desperate, looking at the real possibility of losing everything his father had built. And that's when the pressure turned into something darker, more calculated, more legal. I received a formal letter from a family attorney I'd never met, outlining a proposal for me to invest my entire inheritance into the family business in exchange for a minority non-voting share and a promise of future returns. The document was dense, full of legal language, but the message was clear. Give us the money, trust us to manage it, and maybe someday you'll see some of it back. I had the document reviewed by my own attorney, someone Vincent had recommended. Her assessment was blunt. This was a terrible deal designed to transfer my assets to the family business with no real protection or guarantee. If I signed this, I would have no control, no recourse, and likely no return. The business was failing, she explained, and this was an attempt to use my inheritance as a lifeline. She advised me to refuse. I did. The fallout was immediate and vicious. My father stopped speaking to me except through intermediaries. My brother sent long, rambling emails that alternated between rage and guilt-tripping, calling me heartless, selfish, a traitor to the family. My mother called, crying, begging me to reconsider, saying that I was tearing the family apart, that my grandfather would be ashamed. Extended family members unfriended me on social media, stopped inviting me to events, spread rumors that I'd become greedy and cold. The message from everyone was clear. I was the problem, I was causing pain, and the only way to fix it was to give them what they wanted. For months, I second-guessed myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe family should come first. Maybe I owed them this. The conditioning of a lifetime is hard to shake, even when logic tells you you're being manipulated. I went to therapy. I talked to Vincent, who listened carefully and then asked me one question that changed everything. If they loved you the way they claimed to, would they be treating you this way? The answer, of course, was no. Real love doesn't demand financial sacrifice as proof. Real family doesn't isolate and attack you for refusing to fund someone else's failures. What I was experiencing wasn't love or tradition. It was control, and I was finally old enough and strong enough to see it clearly. I decided to hold firm. I would not invest in the business. I would not sign over my inheritance. I would not set myself on fire to keep my family warm. The inheritance would remain mine, invested wisely, a foundation for my future and perhaps, someday, for my own children if I chose to have them. My grandfather had given me a gift not just of money, but of choice, of autonomy, of the ability to build a life on my own terms. I would honor that gift by accepting it. The family did not take this well. What had been pressure became outright hostility. My father threatened to cut me off completely, as if I hadn't already been emotionally cut off my entire life. My brother threatened legal action, claiming the will was invalid, that our grandfather had been manipulated, that I'd somehow stolen what should have been his. None of it held water legally, but it revealed something important. They weren't upset about tradition or family unity. They were upset about money, and they believed they were entitled to mine. As Christmas approached, I made the decision not to attend the family gathering. I was done subjecting myself to their hostility. I was done pretending we were a functional family. I sent a polite message declining the invitation, wished everyone well, and prepared to spend the holiday alone, which honestly seemed preferable to another evening of thinly veiled accusations. Then my father called personally, his voice taking on a tone I recognized from childhood, the one that meant non-negotiation was about to be framed as discussion. He insisted I come to Christmas dinner. The whole family would be there. It was time to settle this properly as a family, face to face. He promised it would be civil, respectful, a chance to find common ground. Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I also felt the old pull, the desperate hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe they'd finally see me as a person rather than a problem. Against my better judgment, I agreed to come. I told Vincent about the dinner in passing, mentioning I was dreading it. He looked at me thoughtfully and said something that should have been a warning. Be careful. Desperate people do desperate things. I should have listened. I arrived at my parents' house on Christmas evening, my stomach in knots. The house was full of people, extended family I hadn't seen in months, all of whom suddenly wanted to hug me and ask how I was doing with a false cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Something felt staged, orchestrated, like everyone was playing a role in a script I hadn't been given. Dinner was tense but polite, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. My brother kept glancing at my father, some unspoken communication passing between them. My mother was more nervous than usual, her hands shaking slightly as she passed dishes. And then, as dessert was being served, my father stood and suggested we move to the dining room for a family meeting. This wasn't unusual. My father often turned gatherings into impromptu business discussions. But as we filed into the dining room, I noticed my brother's lawyer was there, a man I'd met once before, sitting quietly in the corner with a briefcase. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a family meeting. This was an ambush. If you're still watching to this point, comment "I'm still here," or tell us where you're watching from. Let's see who's following the story. My father positioned himself at the head of the table, my brother to his right, the lawyer nearby. I was directed to sit across from them, family members filling in the remaining seats like an audience in a courtroom. The energy in the room had shifted from holiday celebration to something more sinister, more calculated. My father began by talking about family, about legacy, about my grandfather's wishes, but his words felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech. He talked about the business being in crisis, about how the family needed to come together, about sacrifice and duty and all the words that had been used to control me my entire life. Then the lawyer opened his briefcase and produced documents, new papers I'd never seen before. My father explained that the family had come together to create a solution that would benefit everyone. The business needed capital immediately, or it would fail. My brother needed support to turn things around. And I needed to do my part as a member of this family. The documents would transfer my entire inheritance into a family trust, managed exclusively by my father and brother, with disbursements to be made at their discretion for family needs. In exchange, I would receive a small annual stipend of $20,000 and the knowledge that I'd saved the family legacy. I stared at the papers, reading the terms quickly, my legal training from years of working with Vincent kicking in. This wasn't an investment opportunity. This wasn't even a bad deal. This was theft dressed up in legal language. They would have complete control of my money with no accountability. No oversight, no guarantee of return. The stipend they offered was less than a 1% annual return on a $4 million asset. This was designed to take everything from me while making it look like I'd given it willingly. My hands started shaking, not from fear but from a rage so deep and old that I could feel it in my bones. This was it. This was the ultimate expression of everything my family had always believed about me. I existed to serve them. My value was in what I could provide to men, and my consent was optional. My father pushed the papers toward me, the pen placed deliberately on top. "Sign it," he said, his voice dropping into that commanding tone that had made me obey for 33 years. "This inheritance belongs to the men in this family. It's tradition. It's what your grandfather would have wanted. You're being selfish and you're tearing this family apart. It's time to stop being difficult and do what's right." My mother sat beside me, her eyes on her hands, refusing to meet my gaze, her silence speaking louder than any words. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face that I'd seen 1,000 times before, so certain this would go his way because it always had. Extended family members watched from their seats, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement, all of them complicit in this moment. Some of them had probably been promised money too, incentivized to pressure me, to make me feel isolated and outnumbered. The pen was placed in my hand. I looked down at the signature line, at my name printed in neat legal type, at the place where my compliance was expected, where my surrender was assumed. For a moment, I felt that old familiar pull, the conditioning of a lifetime telling me to just sign it, to make everyone happy, to stop causing problems, to be the good daughter they wanted me to be. And then the dining room door opened. Vincent Carrington stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was dressed in his usual impeccable style, a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly in place, his expression calm but his eyes taking in everything with the sharp assessment I'd seen him use in boardrooms with hostile executives and failing companies. The room went completely silent. Every head turned. My father's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something approaching alarm. My brother's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of uncertainty. The lawyer half stood from his chair, then sat back down, clearly unsure of what was happening. My mother looked up for the first time, startled, her eyes moving between Vincent and me with a question forming. Vincent stepped into the room, unhurried, his movements deliberate and controlled. He nodded politely to the gathered family, the gesture somehow managing to be both courteous and dismissive at the same time. Then his gaze settled on me, and I saw something in his expression that steadied me. Concern, yes, but also a quiet confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening here was exactly as wrong as I thought it was. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the stunned silence. "I wouldn't normally intrude on a family gathering, but when you didn't respond to my messages this evening and your location sharing indicated you were here much longer than you'd planned, I became concerned." He paused, his eyes moving deliberately to the documents on the table, to my father's defensive posture, to the lawyer's briefcase, to the faces of family members who suddenly wouldn't meet his gaze. He was reading the room the way he taught me to read boardrooms, seeing all the unspoken dynamics, the power plays, the manipulation. "It appears my concern was justified," he said simply. My father found his voice first, drawing himself up to his full height, attempting to reassert control over his own home. "I'm sorry, but who are you? This is a private family matter, and quite frankly, you're not welcome here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Vincent smiled slightly, the expression not reaching his eyes, the same smile I'd seen him use with executives who thought they could intimidate him. "My name is Vincent Carrington. I'm the managing director of Carrington Strategic Group, and I'm here because one of my senior advisors appears to be in a situation that requires immediate attention." The reaction was instantaneous. Several family members' eyes widened in recognition. Carrington Strategic wasn't just well-known in business circles, it was legendary, the kind of firm that made national news when they took on major corporate restructures, the kind of name that opened doors and ended careers. My uncle, who worked in finance, went pale. My father's eyes widened slightly, his confident posture faltering. My brother looked confused, his gaze snapping to me, something dawning in his expression that should have occurred to him years ago. Vincent continued, his tone conversational but his words precise and cutting. "I've worked with your daughter for nearly 8 years. In that time, she's become one of the most skilled strategic advisors in our practice. She manages accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She advises CEOs and boards of directors for Fortune 500 companies. She has a reputation for integrity, strategic thinking, and excellence that's frankly rare in our industry." He let that information settle over the room like a bomb, watching as family members processed what he was saying, as they realized that the quiet, unimportant daughter they dismissed for decades was someone entirely different from who they'd imagined. "So you'll understand my surprise," Vincent continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, when she mentioned, somewhat reluctantly, that her family was pressuring her to sign over a personal inheritance to resolve someone else's financial mismanagement. "And you'll understand why I felt compelled to check on her when she stopped responding to messages while at a family gathering that she'd been dreading." My father's face flushed red, anger and embarrassment warring for dominance. "This is none of your business. This is a family matter about family money and family legacy. You have no right to come into my home and interfere." "You're absolutely right," Vincent agreed calmly, his tone reasonable. It's none of my business how you choose to run your family or your company. But it becomes my business and my legal obligation when someone attempts to coerce one of my people into making financial decisions under duress, especially when those decisions appear to violate basic legal and ethical standards. He gestured to the papers on the table. May I? Without waiting for permission, he picked up the documents and began reading, his expression never changing, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly, a tell I recognized. After a long moment, he set them down carefully, precisely, and when he looked up at my father, his eyes were cold. These documents, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the room, constitute what could reasonably be considered financial coercion. They're designed to transfer assets from one party to another with no meaningful consideration, no protection, no recourse, and no fiduciary oversight. Any attorney worth their licensing fees would advise their client never to sign these under any circumstances, and certainly not under family pressure at a holiday dinner with witnesses arranged specifically to create social coercion. The family lawyer in the corner shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his briefcase. Vincent turned his attention to him, and I watched the man actually shrink back slightly. I assume you're representing the family in this matter? Vincent asked. The lawyer nodded weakly. Then you should know that what you're facilitating here could be considered a violation of several legal and ethical standards. Undue influence, financial exploitation, and potential fraud among them. The lawyer's face went white. I was just asked to draw up papers. I didn't know the full context. Then perhaps you should have asked, Vincent said coldly. He turned back to my father. Let me be very clear about something. Your daughter's inheritance is her property, legally and ethically. It was left to her by her grandfather in a will that was properly executed, witnessed, and filed. She has no legal obligation to share it, invest it, or sign it over to anyone, regardless of family tradition, business needs, or emotional manipulation. My brother finally spoke up, his voice defensive and aggressive. Who do you think you are, coming in here and making accusations? You don't know anything about our family or our situation. This is about tradition and loyalty, things someone like you wouldn't understand. Vincent turned to him slowly, and I saw my brother actually flinch under that gaze. I understand tradition, Vincent said softly. I also understand financial mismanagement, corporate fraud, and entitled incompetence. I've built a career on identifying it and correcting it. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned it so my brother could see the screen. Your company is currently operating at a 32% loss. You've alienated 70% of your major clients in the past 3 years. You've made 6 significant financial decisions that any first-year business student would recognize as catastrophic. And you've personally extracted over $400,000 from the company for personal expenses that have nothing to do with business operations. My brother's face went from red to pale. How do you know that? That's private company information. Nothing is private in business, Vincent said simply. Especially not when a company is circling the drain and people are starting to talk. Your vendors talk. Your former clients talk. Your employees talk. And when someone in my industry hears that a company might be available for acquisition or restructuring, we do our research. He turned to address the whole room now, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Here's what's actually happening tonight. A family is attempting to coerce a successful, independent woman into funding the failures of a man who has repeatedly demonstrated that he cannot manage money or business. They're using tradition as justification, but what they're really using is emotional manipulation, social pressure, and exploitation of family bonds. And they're doing it because they've always done it, because they've always gotten away with it, because she's always eventually complied. The words hung in the air, and I saw several family members looking uncomfortable now, unable to meet my eyes or Vincent's. My mother had tears running down her face, but she still said nothing. My father looked like he wanted to explode, but was calculating the costs of doing so in front of a witness of Vincent's stature. Vincent turned to me, his expression softening slightly. The question you need to ask yourself is simple. Do you want to sign those papers? I looked down at the documents, at the pen still in my hand, at the signature line that represented so much more than money. It represented every time I'd been dismissed, every time I'd been told to be quiet, every time I'd been expected to sacrifice myself for men who'd never once sacrificed for me. And then I looked at Vincent, at this man who'd seen my value when my own family couldn't, who'd mentored me and believed in me and driven across town on Christmas evening because he was worried about me. I set down the pen carefully. "No," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "No, I don't want to sign them." The word felt like breaking chains, like stepping out of a prison I'd been in so long I'd forgotten what freedom felt like. My father exploded. "You're destroying this family. You're being selfish and ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Vincent stepped between us, not physically, but with his presence, his authority filling the space. "I think it's time for me and my colleague to leave," he said firmly. "And I strongly suggest that everyone in this room carefully consider what's happened here tonight and what it says about your values and your treatment of family." He looked at my father directly. "If you or anyone else continues to pressure her about this inheritance, if you continue to harass or manipulate her, I'll ensure that every business contact I have knows exactly how you treat family members who don't comply with your demands. In our industry, reputation is everything, and right now, yours is hanging by a thread." He turned to me and held out his hand. "Ready to go?" I stood on shaking legs, leaving the unsigned documents on the table. As I moved toward the door, my mother finally spoke, her voice broken. "Please don't go.
We can talk about this.
We're family." I turned back to look at her, at all of them, and felt something break inside me, but it wasn't me breaking down. It was me breaking free. "No," I said quietly. "A family doesn't do this. A family doesn't ambush someone at Christmas dinner with legal documents and emotional blackmail. A family doesn't spend 33 years making someone feel worthless and then demand their money. You want my inheritance because you need it, but you never wanted me.
You never saw me.
And I'm done trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it." My brother stood up angrily. "So you're just going to walk away? Leave the business to fail? Let the family legacy die?" "That's not my responsibility," I said, and the words felt like the truest thing I'd ever spoken. "You were given every opportunity, every advantage, every benefit of the doubt. You had parents who believed in you, who supported you, who gave you a business to run. What you did with those opportunities is on you, not on me. And I'm not going to light myself on fire to keep you warm anymore." Vincent's hand was on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. "We should go." As we walked toward the door, my father made one last attempt. "If you leave now, you're not welcome back. You'll be choosing him over your family. Is that really what you want?" I stopped at the threshold and looked back at him. "I'm not choosing him over family. I'm choosing me. And that's something I should have done a long time ago." We left then, walking out into the cold December night, and as the door closed behind us, I heard the eruption of voices, recriminations, and anger. But it wasn't my problem anymore. In Vincent's car, I started crying, years of pain and anger and relief all coming out at once. He didn't say anything, just handed me tissues and drove, letting me process in silence. Finally, when I could speak, I asked the question that had been building. "How did you know to come?" He smiled slightly, keeping his eyes on the road. You told me you were dreading this dinner. You told me your father had promised it would be civil, but you didn't believe him. And then you weren't responding to messages, and your location showed you at the house for over 3 hours. I've been in enough hostile negotiations to recognize when someone's being cornered. He glanced at me. I also did some research on your family business. When I saw how bad things were, I knew tonight was probably going to be more than just an uncomfortable dinner. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing what they never did, for believing I was worth coming to check on. You're not just worth checking on, Vincent said firmly. You're one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. You're brilliant, strategic, ethical, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. What happened tonight wasn't about your worth. It was about their inability to see it. He paused. And for what it's worth, I think your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing with that will. He was giving you not just money, but permission to choose yourself, to build your own life, to be free of obligations that were never fair in the first place. We drove in silence for a while longer, and I watched the Christmas lights blur past, thinking about everything that had happened. What happens now? I asked finally. Vincent considered the question. Now you live your life on your terms. You invest that inheritance wisely, build your future, and stop carrying the weight of other people's expectations and failures. You're good at your job, you have a future with the firm if you want it, and you have the freedom to make choices based on what you want, not what they demand. He smiled. And if they continue to harass you, we'll handle it, legally and decisively. But I suspect after tonight, they'll be too busy dealing with the consequences of their own actions to bother you much. He was right. In the weeks that followed, I heard through extended family that Christmas night had ended in spectacular arguments, with family members who'd witnessed the scene taking sides, some defending my parents and brother, others quietly reaching out to me to apologize for their part in what happened. My father's business continued its decline, eventually filing for bankruptcy protection 6 months later. My brother blamed everyone but himself, burned through what resources remained, and eventually had to find actual employment for the first time in his life. My parents sent one letter, drafted by an attorney, making a final appeal for me to reconsider and invest in saving the family business. I sent back a single sentence through my own attorney. No. Over time, some family relationships were rebuilt on my terms, with boundaries I enforced. My mother eventually apologized, though it took her 2 years and therapy to get there. My father never did, too proud and too invested in his version of reality to admit he'd been wrong. My brother and I haven't spoken since that night, and I'm at peace with that. The inheritance remained mine. I invested it wisely with the help of financial advisors Vincent recommended, used some of it to buy a small house, donated to causes I cared about, and built a financial foundation that gave me security and choices. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the lesson my grandfather had tried to teach me, the one Vincent helped me finally learn, that I was worth more than what I could provide to others, that my value wasn't determined by my family's assessment of me, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose yourself, even when everyone around you demands that you sacrifice yourself instead. 3 years after that Christmas dinner, I was promoted to partner at Carrington Strategic. Vincent gave a speech at the celebration where he talked about my skills, my integrity, and my growth. He never mentioned that night, but when he looked at me, I knew he remembered, and I knew he was proud. Not of what I'd overcome, but of who I'd become. I still think about that moment sometimes, standing at that table with the pen in my hand, feeling the weight of expectations and manipulation, and a lifetime of being told I didn't matter. And I think about the choice I made, the word I spoke, the freedom I claimed. No is a complete sentence. No is an act of self-preservation. And sometimes, no is the most powerful word you can speak, especially to people who've spent your entire life trying to make sure you never learn to use it. My grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the money. It was showing me that I deserved to have a choice, that my life was mine to build, and that I was worth more than the role my family had assigned me. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance you can receive is learning to finally choose yourself. Do you think justice was truly served? What would you have done in this situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you thought this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in the next case we're covering, a story about corporate espionage, family secrets, and a whistleblower who risked everything to expose the truth. What's your take on this? Comment below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself.